I was 8 when I learned a birthday could be buried without being forgotten. "Don't touch the icing, Sophie," Mom said, laughing as my sister reached for the bowl. "You'll mess up your cake." "It's so pretty," Sophie said. "Can I have more flowers?" "You can have anything you want today." I stood in the kitchen doorway holding a glass of water Dad had told me to bring. The cake on the counter was pink and huge, with silver candles beside it and balloons tied to the chairs. My birthday had been 12 days earlier. No cake, no candles, no balloons, nothing. Dad glanced at me. "Why are you standing there?" "You told me to bring this." "Then put it down and stop staring." I set the glass down. "Can I help?" I asked. Mom kept smoothing frosting. "No." "I can blow up balloons." "We already did." "I can set the table." Dad sighed. "Ethan, go upstairs if you're going to hover." I should have left, but I kept looking at the cake. Sophie turned to me. "Do you like it?" "It looks nice." "It's bigger than Daniel's." Daniel walked in, grabbed a cookie and smirked. "Of course it is. She's Mom's favorite." Mom smiled. Dad almost did too. Then Daniel looked at me. "Why are you here?" "Nothing." "That's all you do," he said. "Stand around looking weird." "Daniel," Mom said, but she was amused. I looked at the cake again before I could stop myself. Mom noticed. Her whole face changed. "Don't start," she said. I didn't say anything. "You don't have to." Dad handed Sophie the candle box. "Go count these." She ran into the dining room. I stayed where I was. Mom wiped her hands on a towel. "Why do you always do this?" "Do what?" "Make everything heavy." "I'm not doing anything." "You stand there with that face," Daniel said, "like somebody hurt you." Mom folded the towel. "Your birthday passed. We are not doing this again." My throat tightened. I didn't ask for anything. "No," she said. "You just remind everyone." "Remind everyone of what?" Dad cut in fast. "Enough." But I was tired of that word. Enough. It always meant I had to stop before I got near the truth. "Why does Sophie get a party and I get nothing?" I asked. Mom stared at me. "Because today is her birthday." "It was my birthday too." Dad slammed his hand on the counter. "Watch your tone." "I'm asking." Mom crossed her arms. "Your day is different." "How?" "It just is." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting," Dad said. Daniel bit into his cookie. "Maybe they forgot." "They didn't forget," I said. Nobody answered. That silence hurt more than yelling. Sophie skipped back in. "I need 7 candles, Mummy." Mom turned soft again. "Then 7 candles you shall have." She kissed Sophie's forehead. I watched her and tried to remember the last time she had kissed mine. I couldn't. Sophie looked at me. "Why is Ethan sad?" "I'm not sad," I said. Mom shot me a hard look. "Go upstairs." "I want to stay." "No." "Please." "This is not about you," she snapped. The words landed hard. I looked at Dad. "Did I do something wrong?" He kept slicing strawberries. "Not everything needs to be talked about." That was always his answer. "Leave it alone. Go upstairs. Be quiet." I looked back at Mom. "You said my birthday brings bad memories." She went still. "Go upstairs." "What bad memories?" Dad's voice dropped low. "Now." Daniel rolled his eyes. "You always ruin everything." Sophie hugged Mom's waist. "I want him to go." I thought I would cry. I was 8. I should have cried. I should have yelled. I should have done something. But I just nodded. "Okay," I said. I went upstairs without slamming the door. My room was small and plain, with one weak lamp and a bed that creaked every time I moved. I sat on the edge of it and stared at the wall. I kept waiting for Mom to come in and say she was sorry. I waited for Dad to knock once, clear his throat, and tell me to come downstairs. I even waited for Daniel to mock me from the hallway, because at least that would mean someone remembered I was there. No one came. Downstairs, I was already gone. An hour later, the party started below me. The doorbell rang. People laughed. Music played. Then I heard someone shout, "Happy birthday, Sophie!" I sat on my bed and whispered, "Happy birthday, Ethan." No one heard me. In that house, even my birthday sounded like a secret I was supposed to keep from myself forever. That was the year I understood the truth. My birthdays were never forgotten. They were hidden, buried on purpose. Daniel got gifts. Sophie got candles, cake, and pictures. I got silence and closed doors. One missed birthday could have been a mistake, but this was already a pattern, and patterns tell the truth families refuse to say out loud. By the time I turned 9, I already knew my birthday was not a date in our house. It was a problem to be managed. A week before it, Mom started cleaning in angry silence. 2 days before it, she picked fights over nothing. "Why is this floor still dirty?" "I swept it," I said. "Then sweep it again." "I already did." "Are you arguing with me?" "No, because it sounds like you are." Dad looked up from the newspaper. "Just do what she says, Ethan." I took the broom back without another word. The next year was worse. My birthday fell on a Saturday, and Mom announced at breakfast, "We're going to your aunt's house." Daniel grinned. "For what?" "To help her with the garage." Sophie frowned. "But I wanted pancakes." "You can have pancakes tomorrow, sweetheart." I looked at my bowl. "Do we have to go all day?" Mom's eyes cut toward me. "Why?" "Just asking." Dad answered for her. "Because the world doesn't stop for you." At my aunt's house, I carried boxes while Daniel played outside, and Sophie sat inside eating cookies with the adults. When my aunt asked, "Wait, isn't today Ethan's?" Mom cut her off fast. "No, you're thinking of something else." My aunt looked confused. "I thought it was near the middle of May." Dad laughed too loudly. "You know how dates blur." I stood there holding a box of Christmas lights, listening to my own day get erased. If a teacher said, "Birthday coming up, Ethan?" I shrugged and said, "Not really." If a classmate asked, "What did you get?" I said, "Nothing big." If anyone noticed I wore Daniel's old shoes with the peeling soles or his faded jackets, I acted like I didn't care. One afternoon at school, a boy in my class pointed at my sweater and laughed. "Did your brother die and leave you his closet?" A few kids laughed. I said, "At least I have a sweater." He smirked. "Yeah, from 1940. That night at dinner, I tried once to ask for something of my own. "Dad," I said, "I need a new backpack. The zipper broke." Daniel snorted. "Use mine from last year." "It's ripped." "So sew it." Mom kept eating. "We are not buying a perfectly good backpack because you want something new." "It isn't good." "It carries things, doesn't it?" Dad asked. "Barely." He put his fork down. "Then carry less." Daniel laughed. Sophie copied him. I looked at Mom. "Can I at least get one for school?" She didn't look at me. "You need to learn not to be wasteful." Nobody called Daniel wasteful when he outgrew his things. Nobody called Sophie ungrateful when she wanted pink balloons instead of purple. Those words belonged to me. At family dinners, I learned more by staying quiet. One Christmas, I was in the hallway when I heard Aunt Maria whisper, "Linda never got over that pregnancy, did she?" Another voice answered, "They nearly split up over it. Money was terrible. He blamed her, she blamed the baby." "The accident," Aunt Maria said softly. I stopped breathing. Then came the reply that stayed with me for years. Some children enter a family. Some children happen to one. I stood there so still my legs shook. I wanted to run in and scream that I could hear them. I wanted to ask what kind of people talked about a child like he was damage. Instead, I went to the bathroom, locked the door, and stared at myself in the mirror. The accident. It explained too much. The birthdays, the hand-me-downs, the way Mom's face hardened when I walked into a room, the way Dad treated me like noise. The year I turned 11, Mom sent Daniel and Sophie to the movies with Dad and kept me home. "Why can't I go?" I asked. Because you talked back. I said I finished my homework. You said it with attitude. That's not talking back. She stepped closer. Do you want to make today harder than it already is? That sentence hit me like cold water. Harder than it already is. For her, not me. When she left the room, I sat at the kitchen table until I heard a knock at the back door. It was Mrs. Harper from next door, holding a plate covered with foil. I baked too much, she said. May I come in? I nodded. She set the plate down and lifted the foil. A slice of apple pie sat there, warm and shining. For me? I asked. She smiled gently. For the young man whose birthday nobody seems brave enough to mention. I froze. I didn't mean to pry, she said. Old walls have thin ears. I looked at the pie, then at her. It's okay. No, she said softly. It isn't. My throat burned. You don't have to do this. I know. She slid the plate closer. Every child deserves to be celebrated. No one had ever said those words to me before. I tried to answer, but my mouth shook. I looked down because I didn't want her to see my face break apart over a slice of pie and one kind sentence. But she saw anyway. She touched my shoulder and said, There is nothing wrong with you, Ethan. I believed nothing in that house, but for a trembling second, I wanted to believe her. I found the letter because I was looking for something stupid. Mom, I called from the hallway.
Have you seen my old debate notes?
No. I checked my room. Then check harder. I already did. Her voice sharpened. Stay out of my desk. I wasn't going in there. Good, she said, because if I find out you touched anything, you'll regret it. I should have walked away. But I had a presentation the next morning, and I knew she sometimes shoved school papers into random drawers when she cleaned. So I waited until she left for the store. Dad was in the garage. Daniel was out. Sophie was upstairs. I stepped into the office and opened the top drawer. Pens, bills, receipts. The second had folders and a cracked photo frame. The bottom drawer stuck halfway. I tugged harder. A brown envelope slid loose and dropped onto my shoe. Not Ethan. Infant male Carter. My stomach turned. My hands shook so hard the papers rattled. Under the envelope were hospital papers, a social worker card, and a folded sheet with Mom's handwriting. The first page was a hospital summary. I saw my birth date, my weight, my mother's name, and one sentence that made my skin go cold. Mother expresses difficulty bonding with newborn. Behind it was a consultation note. Options for temporary placement were underlined. A number had been circled beside the words adoption counseling. No, I whispered. I tore open the sealed envelope. Inside was a letter. I don't know how to feel when I look at him. Richard barely speaks to me anymore. We were already drowning before this pregnancy. Now I look at this baby and all I can think is that everything broke when he came. I kept reading. I wanted a different life. I wanted peace. I wanted time. I wanted my marriage back. I know it is wrong, but when they place him in my arms, I feel panic, not love. There was another paper beneath it, shorter, written by Dad. The decision is yours, but if we keep him, then we keep him because it is our responsibility. I cannot promise more than that. I will provide. I will stay. But I can't pretend this is what I wanted. I dropped into the chair behind the desk. Not son, not love, not choice, just responsibility. I heard the front door open. Ethan, Mom called. Where are you? Her footsteps got closer. Then she appeared in the doorway, saw the drawer open, and went pale. What did you do? I stood up. What is this? She crossed the room fast. Give me that. I pulled back. You almost gave me away. Her mouth tightened. You had no right to read that. That's your answer? Give it to me. No. Dad came in behind her. What's going on? I held up the papers. Did you almost get rid of me? He looked at Mom first. That was answer enough. Say something, I shouted. Mom's face hardened. Fine. You want the truth? Yes. Things were bad. You wrote that everything broke when I came. You were not an easy situation. I was a baby. You were a disaster, she snapped. Financially, emotionally, all of it. Dad rubbed his forehead. Lower your voice. No, I said. You don't get to tell me that now. Mom pointed at me. You should be grateful. I laughed once. For what? For being allowed to stay. The room went dead. I stared at her. Allowed? You think parenting you was some beautiful gift? She said. We were drowning. Dad stepped in. Linda. But she kept going. We had Daniel. We were barely holding things together. Then came you. Then came me, I repeated. Dad looked at me like I was exhausting. Stop acting like a victim. I turned to him. You wrote that keeping me was a duty. It was honesty. It was cruelty. Daniel walked in then. Why is everyone yelling? Mom said, your brother went through private things. Daniel looked at the papers in my hand. So? Put them back. I laughed at him. They almost gave me away. He shrugged. And? I felt something rip loose inside me. And? You're here, aren't you? He said. What do you want? A medal? Sophie appeared behind him.
Quiet and pale. Wait, what? I looked at her, but she couldn't meet my eyes. Mom folded her arms. This family has sacrificed enough. For me? I asked. Or because of me? Dad's silence answered. I dropped the papers onto the desk. For years I had waited for the right conversation, where somebody finally explained everything, and I understood it wasn't my fault. Instead, I got the truth. It had always been my fault in their eyes. I backed toward the door. Mom said, do not walk away from me. I did anyway. That night, lying in bed, I heard them moving downstairs. I stared at the ceiling and thought one clear thing. I was done begging to be loved. And for the first time, leaving didn't feel impossible. It felt necessary. I left 3 days after graduation. Mrs. Harper caught me at the side gate with my duffel bag and said, You're really going? I have to. You have somewhere to stay? For a few nights? That means no. I tried to smile. It means I'll figure it out. She looked at my bag. How much do you have? Enough. That was not an answer. I stared at the ground. $28. She reached into her purse, folded something into my hand, and closed my fingers around it. I can't take this. Yes, you can. It's too much. It's emergency cash, she said. And if your pride starts talking, tell it I'm old and stubborn. My throat tightened. Thank you. She squeezed my arm. Do not go back just because being gone hurts. I nodded, but I did not trust myself to speak. I rented my first room above a laundromat that smelled like bleach and steam. The bed was thin, the window rattled, and the landlord said, Rent's due every Friday. No excuses. I understand. You working? I will be. He looked me over. You look 18. I am. He grunted. Then learn fast. I worked wherever anyone would take me. Dishes, stockroom, night cleaning, moving boxes. A loading dock supervisor shouted, Faster, Ethan. I'm moving. Move harder. At a diner, the manager slid a plate toward me and said, That order's wrong. I wrote what she said. Then hear better. I came home smelling like grease, bleach, and cardboard dust. Some nights I ate noodles. Some nights I slept instead of eating because sleep was cheaper. When people were nice to me, I braced for the hidden cost. A cashier at the corner store once smiled and said, You're here late. I answered, I paid already. She blinked. I was just saying hi. At the warehouse, a guy named Luis handed me half his sandwich and said, You look dead. I'm fine. You're shaking. I said I'm fine. He raised both hands. Okay, keep starving with dignity then. I took the sandwich after he walked away. Whenever someone asked about my family, my whole body went stiff. Going home for the holidays? A co-worker asked. No. Too far? Something like that. You got brothers or sisters? Yeah. You close? No. They usually stopped after that, and I was grateful.
Shame sat on me like a second shirt. I could leave the house, but the house had not fully left me. Mrs. Harper called every Sunday. "Have you eaten?" "Yes." "Something real?" "Mostly." "That means no," she said. Sometimes she wrote letters too, short ones in neat blue ink. "Proud of you for staying standing. Rest when you can. A hard beginning is still a beginning." I kept them in a shoebox under my bed like proof that at least one person said my name with care. Distance started changing me in quiet ways. I stopped waiting for insults when I walked into a room. I stopped listening for slammed doors. I learned how to sit in silence without feeling hunted. Work gave me a routine. Exhaustion gave me sleep. Time gave me air. I told myself birthdays did not matter anymore. I worked through them, ate cheap food and slept early. But every year when the date came, I still caught myself waiting for a voice to say, "Happy birthday,
Ethan, and really mean it.
I opened a savings account with $40. The teller smiled. "Everyone starts somewhere." I almost said, "Don't mock me." Instead I said, "Yeah, somewhere." Months turned into 2 years. I moved from the laundromat room to a basement studio with peeling paint but a stronger lock. I picked up extra shifts, took a cheap bookkeeping course at night, and started helping in the office at the warehouse. My supervisor called me in one morning. "Sit down." I stayed standing. "Did I mess something up?" He frowned. "Do you always look this worried?" "Yes." That made him snort. Then he slid a paper across the desk. "We're making you inventory coordinator." I stared at him. "What?" "You heard me. That's full-time?" "With benefits." I looked at the paper again because my eyes blurred the first time. "Are you sure?" He leaned back. "Ethan, you show up early, keep records better than people twice your age, and don't complain. Try saying thank you like a normal person." "Thank you," I said, voice rough. That night I checked my savings 3 times just to make sure the number was real. For the first time in my life, I felt steady. Then my phone rang. Dad's name filled the screen. I stared at it until it almost stopped. Then I answered. His voice came low and strange. "We need to talk." After everything, they suddenly needed me. I almost said no. Mrs. Harper sat across from me with her tea and listened while I held the phone in my lap like it had insulted me. He said, "We need to talk," I told her. And I hung up. She nodded once. "Fair. I'm not going back there." "You don't have to go back," she said. "You can visit." That sounds like the same thing. No. Going back means becoming who you were there. Visiting means staying who you are now. I looked away. "Why should I give them anything?" "Closure is not the same as weakness," she said. "Sometimes you go so you can see the truth with your own adult eyes." I hated that she was right. 2 days later, I pulled into the old driveway and almost laughed. The house looked smaller, sadder. The paint was peeling. One shutter hung crooked. The front lawn was patchy and dry. Dad opened the door before I knocked. "You came." "Clearly." He stepped aside. "Come in." Mom stood in the hallway with a smile so stiff it looked painful. "Ethan." I waited. She said, "It's nice to see you." That was new. Forced, fake, but new. Daniel came out of the living room. "You took your time." "And you still sound like you're 16, I said. His jaw tightened. Sophie appeared behind him. She looked older, thinner, and strangely careful. "Hi," she said. "Hi." Mom clasped her hands. "Let's sit down." I stayed standing. "Dad said you needed to talk." He cleared his throat. "Things have been difficult." "That's vague," Daniel muttered. "Here we go." Dad ignored him. "The business didn't work out." "What business?" Mom shot Daniel a look. "The one your brother started." I turned to him. "You started a business?" He shrugged. "It was supposed to grow fast." Dad snapped. "Because you said you understood the market." I did. "You understood nothing," Dad said. That surprised me. Dad almost never spoke to Daniel like that. Mom jumped in. "This isn't productive." I looked around the room. "How bad is it?" Silence. Then Dad said, "There are loans." "How many?" Enough. Numbers. Mom's voice sharpened. You don't need every detail. If you want help, I do. Daniel leaned back. There it is. There what is? I asked. The part where you enjoy this. I stared at him. Enjoy what? Watching the family that treated me like dirt pretend I owe them rescue. Mom flinched. Lower your voice. No. Sophie looked between us. Can somebody just say what's happening? Dad rubbed his face. I co-signed for Daniel. Inventory, equipment, lease obligations. Then he expanded too early. Daniel shot back. Because you told me to think bigger. I told you to be careful. No, you told me not to embarrass you by playing small. That shut the room up. I looked at Mom. And you? She folded her arms. Your father has been under pressure. That isn't an answer. She exhaled sharply. Bills are behind. Creditors are calling. Satisfied? Not even close. Dinner was tense from the first plate. Mom put roast chicken on the table as if the right meal could glue authority back onto her face. Eat before it gets cold. I sat. Daniel did not look at me. Sophie kept twisting her engagement ring. I noticed and asked, You're engaged? She nodded. His name is Grant. Daniel smirked. You'll love him. He cares about appearances as much as Mom does. Daniel, Mom warned. Sophie went quiet. I looked at her. Was that supposed to be a joke? She stared at her plate. Grant just likes things a certain way. Mom said quickly, He comes from a good family. Sophie's mouth tightened. You always say that when you mean rich. Nobody answered. Then Dad looked at me and said the thing they had clearly rehearsed. You've done well for yourself. I almost laughed. Mom added, We're proud that you became stable. Proud. The word sounded stolen. Not one of them asked how I survived after leaving. Not one asked if I had ever spent birthdays alone and hungry. I put my fork down. What do you want? Dad said, A temporary loan. Daniel said, It's not even that much. How much? Mom named the number. I leaned back. That's not a loan. That's a lifeboat. Dad's face darkened. Families help each other. Do they? I asked. Mom's smile vanished. Don't start this again. Again? I said. You mean the part where I remember things accurately? Daniel slammed his glass down. You act like you're the only one who ever suffered. I looked at him. No, I act like I remember who was allowed to matter. Sophie looked up fast. Mom said, That is unfair. Is it? I asked. Who got birthdays? Who got choices? Who got defended? Dad said, We are discussing the present. The present exists because of the past. Sophie's voice came small. Mom, is that true? Mom froze. What? That he got treated differently? Nobody moved. Daniel snapped. Oh, come on, Sophie. She ignored him. She was looking at me now. Really looking. I said, You never saw it because you never had to. Her face changed, and right there between the untouched plates and the unpaid bills, I felt the room shift. For years I had been the weakest person at that table. Now I was the only one not pretending. My mother called on a Tuesday. Ethan, she said, using my name too carefully. We're having a family dinner this Sunday. I said nothing. It would mean a lot if you came. That depends. On what? On whether this is actually dinner or another meeting where everybody avoids the truth until they need money. Her silence lasted too long. Then she said, It's for your birthday. I almost dropped the phone. My what? Your birthday, she repeated. We thought it would be nice. We, as if neglect had become a group project with matching signatures. I leaned against my kitchen counter and laughed once, low and sharp. You thought it would be nice? Yes. After how many years? Ethan. No, say the number. She didn't. Instead, she said, People have been asking questions. There it was. Not love. Strategy. Relatives had noticed the tension after that dinner. Sophie had stopped posting smiling family photos. Aunt Maria had apparently called twice. My mother was not trying to heal anything. She was trying to patch the outside before the whole house collapsed. "You want me there so people see a cake," I said. "That is not fair." "It's exactly fair." Her voice thinned. "Just come." I should have refused. Instead, I heard Mrs. Harper's voice in my head. "Sometimes the truth needs witnesses." So I went. The dining room looked like a performance. The good plates were out, fresh flowers sat in the middle of the table. Daniel was already drinking. Sophie stood near the window, tense and quiet. 2 aunts, 1 uncle, and 3 cousins had been invited for a small family evening. Mom met me at the door wearing a smile that looked stitched on. "You came." I wanted to see how far this would go. Her mouth tightened. "Please don't do this tonight." I stepped inside. "You already did." Dad appeared from the hallway. "Let's keep things calm." "Calm?" I asked. "You're throwing me my first birthday dinner like I'm supposed to clap." Aunt Maria looked up sharply. Good, let her hear it. Dinner crawled by on fake politeness. "So, Ethan," Uncle Rob said, "your mother says work is going well." "It is." "That's wonderful." Mom jumped in. "He's always been hard-working." I turned to her. "Have I?" She blinked. "Of course." Daniel muttered into his glass. "Here we go." Sophie shot him a look. "Maybe be quiet for once." That surprised everyone. Then dessert came. Mom carried out a cake with white frosting and blue trim. Simple, careful, pathetic. For 1 second the room blurred. I was 8 again, standing in a doorway while someone else got candles. Mom set the cake down and said too brightly, "Happy birthday, Ethan." Nobody joined in right away. Then a few weak voices followed. I looked at the candles. They could have put 1,000 there. It still would not touch the years they buried. Dad cleared his throat. "Your mother worked hard on this." That did it. I stood up. "No," I said. The room went still. Mom forced a laugh. "Ethan, sit down." "No." Her face changed. "Don't embarrass us." I looked at the cake, then at her. "Embarrass you?" Aunt Maria whispered, "Linda." I kept going. "All those years," I said, "I would have been grateful for 1 candle. 1. I would have been grateful if somebody had just said my name and meant it." Nobody moved. "You didn't forget my birthdays," I said. "You erased them." Mom's eyes filled. "That is not what happened." "It is exactly what happened. You started fights. You left the house. You punished me for breathing too loudly around that date." "Stop," Dad said. I turned to him. "Or what? You'll tell me not to act like a victim again?" His jaw locked. I faced the room. "When I was 17, I found the letter, the one I was never supposed to read." Sophie inhaled sharply. Daniel swore under his breath. Mom stood up. "This is private." It stopped being private when it became my life. I heard my own voice and realized something strange. I was not shaking. I said, "My mother wrote that she couldn't bond with me. My father wrote that keeping me was a duty, not a choice. They almost gave me away, and when they didn't, they made sure I felt unwanted every year after." Aunt Maria covered her mouth. Uncle Rob stared at Dad. "Is that true?" Dad looked down. That was answer enough. Mom started crying then, but even through all those tears I saw it clearly. She was not crying because she hurt me. She was crying because the room knew. "I was your son," I said. "But in this house, I was treated like evidence." "Ethan," Sophie whispered, tears in her eyes. I looked at her gently, then back at them. "You don't get to buy back my childhood with frosting." Silence crashed over the table. For the first time in my life, I had told the truth in the room where it was born. And for the first time, I felt free. The morning after the dinner, my phone would not stop ringing. I let it. By noon, Aunt Maria had called twice, Uncle Rob once, and Daniel 4 times. I answered none of them. I was at Mrs. Harper's house fixing the loose hinge on her back gate when she opened the kitchen window and said,
"You look like a man being hunted."
"I kind of am."
"By wolves?"
"By relatives." She nodded. "Sometimes same thing." That made me laugh for half a second. When I finally checked my phone, Sophie had sent one message. "I didn't know. I'm sorry." I stared at it for a long time before replying. "I know." An hour later, Daniel showed up at my apartment without warning. I opened the door, saw his face, and almost shut it again. "You really did it," he said. "Did what?" "You blew up the family." I leaned against the frame. "The family was already cracked." "No, you wanted a scene." "I wanted the truth." He stepped closer. "You always do this. You make everything about you." I laughed in disbelief. "That is an insane thing to say." "You couldn't let one dinner happen." "One dinner?" I snapped. "That was my first birthday cake in a house where I grew up." He rolled his eyes. "You're still whining about birthdays?" "It was never just birthdays." He scoffed. "You love acting like some abandoned orphan." I stared at him. "You got everything." "Because I earned it." That stopped me cold. "Earned it?" "Yeah," he said. "I didn't make things harder. I didn't walk around with that look on my face all the time." I stepped forward. "That look? You mean pain?" He pointed at me. "See? Right there. You need to be the injured one. That's your whole identity." "No," I said quietly. "That was the role all of you gave me so you could feel normal." His face changed then, just for a second. Not guilt, fear. Because if I was not the problem, then maybe he never deserved the pedestal he stood on. He muttered, "You're unbelievable," and walked away before I could answer. A week later, Sophie asked to meet me at a coffee shop halfway across town. She sat down and said, "I don't know how to talk to you. Try honesty." Her eyes filled immediately. "I keep replaying things." "Like what?" "Like every party. Every time Mom bought me a dress and told you to carry the bags. Every time Daniel got something expensive and you got told to be grateful." I thought, she swallowed, "I thought that was just how families worked." I looked down at my coffee. "Not all families." "I know that now." She twisted her ring, then slid it off and set it on the table. "What happened?" I asked. "Grant said family problems should stay hidden. He told me image matters more than old feelings." I let out a dry breath. "Sounds familiar." She nodded. I heard Mom in his voice and it made me sick. For the first time in years, I saw my sister as a person instead of a symbol. Not innocent, not blameless, but waking up. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not because it fixes anything, just because I should have said it sooner." I believed her. That hurt too. Some relatives pulled away from my parents fast. Others called me privately. Aunt Maria said, "I should have spoken years ago." "Why didn't you?" I told myself it wasn't my place. "That made it easier?" Her silence answered. Another aunt said, "We suspected Linda never treated you right." I asked, "And none of you thought a child might need help?" There was no good response to that. Their guilt did not comfort me. It only proved how many people had seen pieces of the truth and chosen convenience. Through all of it, I spent more time at Mrs. Harper's house than anywhere else. Then one afternoon I noticed her hands shaking while she poured tea. "Did you tell your doctor?" She smiled faintly. "That depends. Is this concern, or are you about to scold me?" "Both." Her laugh turned into a cough that went on too long. After that, I drove her to appointments, picked up groceries, and sat with her during bad afternoons when the light looked too thin on her face. One evening she handed me a small, wrapped box. "What's this?" "Open it later." "No." She smiled. Bossy. Suspicious. "Take it home, Ethan." I did. She died 12 days later. At home that night, I opened the box with shaking hands. Inside were birthday cards, dozens of them, one for every year she had known me. The first one said, "Happy birthday, Ethan. The world is better because you are in it." Another said, "You were never too much. You were simply given too little." Another, "I hope one day your name feels safe in your own heart." I sat on my floor and cried so hard I could barely breathe. All those years, I had believed my birthdays were proof that I did not matter. But here was proof of something else. I had always been worth celebrating. I had just been born in the wrong house. When the tears finally slowed, I put the cards back in the box with both hands, careful, like they were holy. My family had spent years refusing me. For the first time in my life, I understood I did not have to keep waiting for them to choose me. 2 years later, I lived in a place that finally felt like mine. It was not huge. It did not need to be. The walls were clean, the windows opened without sticking, and every chair in the apartment belonged to me because I had chosen it. Nothing was borrowed, nothing was passed down. Leah stood at the stove when I came home from work and said, "You're not allowed in here for 10 minutes. I set my keys down. "That sounds controlling." "It is," she said. "Go sit down." "What are you making?" "If I tell you, it ruins the surprise." "I don't like surprises." She looked over her shoulder and smiled. "That is why I'm being gentle with this one." Gentle. I had not known, as a child, that love could sound like that. I sat at the table and watched the sunlight touch the bookshelf I built with my own hands. Leah moved around the kitchen with calm confidence. No slammed drawers, no sharp sighs, no feeling that I was in someone's way. She brought 2 plates over and set them down. "Smells good," I said. "It should. I nearly burned myself twice." "That usually helps." She laughed and sat across from me. "How was work?" "Quiet, which means perfect." "Any disasters?" "Only Craig trying to use the printer like it insulted his family." "That man takes technology personally." I smiled. We ate slowly. We talked about bills, a neighbor's loud dog, and the dying plant by the window. Then she stood up and said, "Stay there." "You say that a lot." "Because you wander." She disappeared into the kitchen and came back with a small cake, white frosting, blue trim. My chest tightened. She set it in front of me gently. "Happy birthday, Ethan," she said. No audience, no performance, no witnesses to impress, just my name, held with care. I looked at the candles and had to blink hard before I could see them clearly. Leah's voice softened. "Too much?" I shook my head. "No. You can say yes." "It's not too much," I said. "It's just the right amount." She reached for my hand. "Then take your time." I laughed once, but it broke in the middle. "You have no idea what this would have meant to me when I was 8. Her fingers tightened around mine. "I think I do." "No," I said quietly. "I would have traded half my childhood for this." She did not answer with pity. "Make a wish," she said. I looked at the candles. Then I said, "I don't think I need to anymore." I blew them out. 3 days later, my mother called. I almost let it ring out. Instead, I answered and said, "What?" She was quiet for a second. "Your father and I were hoping to see you." "For what?" "To talk." "We've done that." "No," she said carefully. "We haven't." I leaned against the counter. Leah looked up from the couch, saw my face and muted the television. "What do you want from me?" I asked. My mother exhaled. "Not money." "That's a nice change." "Ethan." "No, it's refreshing." Her voice tightened. "Can you meet us?" Every part of me wanted to say no, but there was no fear in me anymore, only distance. So I met them at a cafe the next afternoon. Dad looked older, smaller. Mom looked polished, but tired around the eyes. They stood when I walked over, like they were unsure what rules applied to me now. I stayed standing. Mom said, "Thank you for coming." Dad added, "Sit down." I took the chair across from them but kept my coat on. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Mom said, "We know we failed you." I almost laughed. The sentence had arrived decades late and still sounded rehearsed. Dad stared at his coffee. "We handled things badly." "Badly?" I asked. "You buried me inside my own home." Mom flinched. Dad said nothing. She tried again. "We were overwhelmed. You were cruel. It was a hard time. It was my whole childhood. That landed. Dad finally looked at me. We can't change the past. No, I said, you can't. Mom's eyes filled. We're asking if there is any way forward. I studied them both and realized something simple. I no longer needed anything from them. Not an apology polished enough to sound sincere. Not tears. Not explanations. The hunger they had created in me was gone. So I told them the truth. I survived without your love, I said, but I should never have had to. Mom covered her mouth. Dad closed his eyes. I went on. I am not here to punish you. Life already did that. I'm here because I needed you to see me once without the old story wrapped around me. Mom whispered, we do see you. I shook my head. Now you do. After I built a life you can respect. Dad said, what happens next? I thought about it before answering. I forgive enough to put down what I carried, I said, but not enough to pretend it was smaller than it was. Mom cried then. I stood up. I was never your mistake. Neither of them moved. The mistake, I said, was treating a child like he had to earn being loved. Then I left. That night, Leah lit the extra candles we had forgotten to use and pushed the cake box toward me. Round two? She asked. I smiled and sat beside her on the floor. Outside, the city hummed. Inside, my home felt warm. I looked at the candlelight and understood something I wished I had known years earlier. My birthday had never been worthless. My parents had failed it because they failed me. But they did not get to define the day anymore. I did. I cut the cake. Leah kissed my cheek. I laughed. For the first time in my life, my birthday belonged to me. And so did I.